So I'm gonna get started. We're gonna turn it right over to Jennifer Regan. She's an associate professor here at Arcadia University in the Historical and Political Studies Department, and she is one of the key faculty in the International Peace and Conflict Resolution Master's Program. So she is a hostess as well. I will turn it over to her.
Thank you. I'm not very good with microphones. Can people all hear me? All right, well, thank you all for making it to the last plenary session of what's been a really wonderful panel. My main role here is to introduce our amazing speakers and then to mercilessly and lovingly encourage them to respect each other's time as they give their 10 to 15 minute remarks. We have 4 amazing speakers today, each of whom could give their own keynote address. I'm humbled and honored to be moderating this particular panel. We also have a poet who will get us started in a minute, and I'll tell you a little bit about each one of them. In a few minutes, I'm going to introduce everyone and then let them speak on their own so that I don't have to keep getting up and down and grappling with the microphone. Poet Steve Blum will get us started. He is a New York-based organizer and poet, and he's going to share a few short pieces with us. He's the founder of the Old and New Project, which brings together elder and youth activists across ideological lines to build for future strategic action. After Steve reads a few poems for us, we'll have several other speakers, and I understand the order has been changed slightly, so let me try to get the order right. Our first speaker will be Liliane Umuhoza. She's an undergraduate senior at Juniata College, majoring in peace studies. She's a gifted and internationally recognized orator and organized, and she has served as an intern at the Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, and is active in US-based genocide awareness and action programs and many other human rights efforts. Our next speaker will be Bernadette Muthien, who serves on South Africa's Constitutional Commission for Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Rights. She served on the Executive Council of the International Peace Research Association and is co-founder of the African Peace Research and Education Association. Giselle Rodriguez, unfortunately, is not able to join us this morning. We're very sad about that, but it fortunately gives each of the other speakers a little bit more time to speak. Our next speaker will be Joyce Sen, who is an architect by training, a social housing and planning activist, and is involved in the organizing process of the World Social Forum in India. Joy has intensively engaged with and taken part in WSF through Critical Action Center in Movement, an organization that he co-founded. And our final speaker will be Stellan Vinthagen, the inaugural endowed chair in the study of nonviolent direct action and civil resistance and director of the Resistance Studies Initiative at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He's also a researcher at the Department of Social and Behavioral Studies, University West, and School of Global Studies, University of Gothenburg. So this is a very impressive panel on international perspectives on the conference theme. We have representatives from a variety of countries, Rwanda, South Africa, Sweden, and India, as well as New York. And I look forward to hearing what everyone has to say. So I'll welcome Steve.
All right, I want to thank the conference organizers for inviting me to kick this off this morning. I have 3 short poems that I think reflect the themes of this conference. April 10th, 2006, New York City. Sometimes politics proves to be as strange as poetry. Never thought that I would feel at home in a demonstration where one American flag follows another, after another, after another. But today it's not the usual "my country can beat up your country" crowd. No, this time it's the invisible people speaking out loud for a change. I am Haitian, I am Korean, I am Pakistani, they tell me. I am Dominican, I am Mexicana, I am Filipino, I am Ethiopian, I am Jamaican, I am Guatemalan, and I live here too. I will not be less of a human being than you. I fly the flag of my country, and I fly the flag of my other country, for whether I am there or here, your nation would collapse without the work I do. So I stand watching, ask myself whether we have perhaps just taken one small step towards the day when every human being will at last fly every flag of every nation and still feel at home. One problem that was with us even more than 50 years ago and is still with us, that's what this poem is about. In New York City, everyone knows the name of Sean Bell, who was shot 50 times by the police in 2008, but I mention it just in case people outside New York City don't know the name. The poem is called The Bell. Listen as it reverberates for Sean 50 times, once for every bullet propelled from a policeman's gun, then 50 times for how many others over so many years. Let our bell ring true, you'll find no justice here. Fatally flawed police work, but not criminal, Judge Arthur Cooperman proclaims. His honor does not seem to comprehend. Fatally flawed police work is criminal, and so is a fatally flawed judgment, though this by now is too well known. So I decide upon a proclamation of my own. Let our bell sound loud enough to call out 50 times 50 times 50, and even more. As many powers of 50 as we require, marching proud enough to disarm all the criminals draped in their judicial robes or brandishing policemen's guns, and then an honest justice based on truths we hold self-evident may finally be done. And finally, one which we talk about a lot of people we know, famous people, people who contributed to the movement, and all those tributes are well worth our time and attention. But this poem is about all the people we don't know, whose names we've never heard of and aren't recorded in the history books. In memoriam. Most martyrs rest in graves, undraped with flowers. Nobody will remember when or where or how they sacrificed all that was within their power, and so I cannot tell you now. Most martyrs rest in graves, undraped with flowers. Beneath more storied tombs, I sense it's always true, like countless other she and heroes who gave equally as they were called, and so, although well praised, the celebrated dead must be. This round, let's toast a deeper victory for deeds which otherwise remain unsung. Unfurl the banner left too long unhung for all who could in life achieve no more than try their best. And now, at last, in graves we've draped with flowers, rest. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So, my name is Liliane Umuhoza. I am from Rwanda, but I am a student at Juniata College doing peace and conflict studies. I'm a senior. So, my world fell apart when I was 2 years old. That was in 1994 during the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Even though I was too young to recall what happened, I grew up facing the consequences of that atrocity in every corner of my life. I have been raised by a mother who was able to escape after my father was killed and after losing a large number of my family members. Picturing my mother with a 2-year-old child, me, running and hiding to be able to cross the border to Congo, where we stayed as refugees, is an image that I wish couldn't come in my dreams often. My teenage life was a mess. I was struggling with my background, my story, trying to make a sense of something that will never make sense. the genocide, killing and hunting people simply because of who they are. I always highlight that I feel so blessed that I survived with my mother because she was brave enough to get married again, something that a lot of survivors were not able to do after the genocide, and have other children, my 3 other wonderful siblings. So thank God I have a family, something that I don't take for granted, because I grew up in a community that doesn't discuss about normal family lifestyle. Do you know why? When I was in high school, my best friend asked to go home with me during break. I went to a boarding school. As you can imagine, I was so excited. I came up with a long plan of fun stuff we are going to do at home. But she didn't seem interested in my plans. Then I asked her why. She said, "I'm not asking to go home with you only to have fun. I want to learn about a complete family lifestyle. I want to have my own family in the future, but I don't know how that works. I've never had that experience in my life." So my best friend's story is that she lost his father during the genocide, and a year later, her mother died as well due to the consequences of the genocide. As an older sister, she became a mother to her 2 other siblings at the age of 6. I grew up in a community that was totally broken, all kind of brokenness you can think of. In a country that was starting from zero to become a country again. I am not telling you my story to feel sorry for me or to make you cry. I'm telling you my story to make you angry, frustrated, and not stop from there. I want you to turn that anger, tears, and frustration into a nonviolent revolution. I spent a long time feeling sorry for myself, but that didn't bring any change in my life and my community. I was one of those smart kids in school, but I had to repeat the 8th grade because my grade dropped from 85% to 40% because I was fighting a battle with myself, against myself. Love didn't have place in my life, and life wasn't making sense to me at all. To cut the long story short, going through therapy, getting different kind of support helped me to come back to term. And that's when I turned my anger, my trauma, and my tears into an nonviolent revolution of trying the best I can to make people around me, people around me, to make their world a better place. I didn't say to make the world a better place. I said to make people's world a better place. Almost 2 years ago, I started a program that supports women genocide survivors in Rwanda. Rape is one of the weapons that were used during the genocide in Rwanda. So the women in this program experienced rape during the genocide. And as a consequence, many of these women are HIV positive and have been, in the last 24 years, have been raising children conceived from that atrocious experience. The program brings these women together in a 3-day retreat where they receive psychological support from counselors and psychologists, and through sharing their stories. They also receive a training about income-generating activities so that they can find ways to support themselves financially, because many of them live in a total poverty. So far, 70 women have gone through this program. We were supposed to watch a short video, but I'm not sure if the person is here to help with that.
support for a video. Can I go?
It's okay. If you go if you search for SURF Survivors Fund or GSF, Genocide Survivors Foundation, you will be able to find more information about this program, and you can be able to watch the video. Survivors Fund or Genocide Survivors Foundation, GSF. So we have had women who share their stories for the first time after 23 to 24 years, because finally they are given a space and attention to share their stories. Everything around these women is a memory of their experience of what happened to them during the genocide. They have to take medication often because of their health status. And that itself is a memory of what they have gone through, and they can't escape it. How can you define peace for these women? How do you define violence and peace for a woman in a conflict zone in Congo who said, "It's okay if they rape me, but I need food for my child"? How do you define violence and peace to people of color in this country who leave their home without an assurance of coming back because they can die anytime? My message to you is that we need to write the next chapter of our history. We need to decolonize our revolution and definition of peace. We need to take action. We need to make people's world a better place, people around us. And we need to build bridges instead of walls. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you going now? Do you want me to just start? Let's go. It's really a privilege for me to be here today. And I should start by thanking not only the individuals like Matt and Michael who brought me here today, but what Barbara Ellis-Mann, the Iroquois scholar based at University of Toledo, calls the spirits of place. The indigenous peoples who lived here aeons before any of us got here. Also to thank for you anything. Also to thank better. Also to thank voila. No irony. Also to thank better. Also to thank the slaves and indentured laborers on whose backs and broken pelvises the economies and indeed the politics of this beautiful and vast continent of North America was born. Then, while in a good mood, to reflect back to one of the founding fathers of the peace movement, Johan Galtung's 1996 triangulation of violence and its obvious antitheses: peace, direct violence, structural violence, which we're all familiar with, but the more tricky and troublesome one, cultural violence. Without its eradication, we are never at peace. We never have what we know as the complete absence of violence, which includes racism, sexism, homophobia, and indeed victim blaming, which is so prevalent amongst us. Me, you, everybody. And therein lies the rub of my contribution today, is not only reiteration of the values that we all need to reiterate and live and practice, values of ethics, justice and compassion, which ironically we need to remind ourselves of more within the peace studies and peace activism spaces, more so than in other places, because we are the ones that people are looking for practicing and living and showing as examples, people who are ethical, who are just, who are compassionate. And these things don't necessarily grow on us, like if I go to a Buddhist retreat for a week and then I'll come back holier than thou, maybe. But more so in terms of a brutal, at times, honesty, in not even at times, but a brutal honesty, almost all of the time, I would argue, in these very dark and dangerous times. Brutal honesties are what we need to address the issues that people, which comes to the second part of the discussion of what is really needed, is again a reiteration of things. So Galtung's Triangulation of Violence comes from 1996, his ancient book Peace by Peaceful Means. Before him even, Kimberly Crenshaw and her friends were working on intersectionalities and how critically important this is to us in terms of the lenses. What was that? Respect, as in respect, as in re-look at how we are, how we behave, how we look at things, how we work, and how we are amongst one another, but also within ourselves. How much of the violence that we suffer every day have we internalized? Do I feel beautiful because I'm a little bit more weight than the norm? Is my hair too curly, too little curly? Am I tall, short, whatnot, as a woman and as human beings in general? And how much of these violences have we internalized? And do we then spew forth in our, not only on ourselves, but in our families, if indeed we have those, in our communities and in our collectives, and indeed within IPRA, International Peace Research Association, and in your PJSA? I'm not a member, I'm just a guest. I hope not to be too rude. Is it all right so far? Good. So now we are here, and in the 90s, when I was a youngster and healing from extraordinary violences perpetrated on my body, violences I witnessed daily on the streets as we were raging war, some violent, some non-violent, against this brutal regime, apartheid, and in solidarity with other beautiful people all over the world, and still to this day, the solidarity. You know, what were the questions that I was confronted with? We had to heal. As a youngster, I had to heal from all the brutality and violence that was perpetrated on my body and all around me. So not only the direct violence, not only the structural violence of apartheid, but also the vicarious trauma I suffered daily under apartheid within my family, on the streets of the activism, watching people brutally, a girl next to me, brutally just there, get beaten to death before me, like a blood splatter. This is daily, and many other people have had very similar experiences. How do you heal from this? And lucky for me, there were some very sweet Quaker people, and they came and they did enormously good deeds, Quakers and others, in South Africa. A healing of memories, a great many good programs, some of which I scoffed at, others which I just internalized and ate, lapped up like I would custard on a wintry day. So, given that, you know, I have a very good feeling about Quakers. I am very fond of Quakers. But how did Quakers come to this country? They were fleeing genocides themselves. And what did they come here? How did they find the pieces of land that they pegged for themselves? Whose land was it? Where do they come from? So even Quakers, whom I love with all my heart, must be asked brutal questions and must themselves confront the depredations upon which everything that they believe is founded. So therein lies the deep and brutal honesties we each have to ask. Where do you come from? Your faith is non-violence. Your faith is, you know, friendship and love and compassion, ethics and justice. And how can you be ethical and just if everything that you are, everything that you've built, if all of that, every college, beautiful liberal arts college, everything, your peace studies program is founded on genocide? So none of the work that we must do must make us feel comfortable. And the only comfort we can ever have is if we attain the positive peace that we are all crying for and yearning for. And the people who came long before me, some of my mentors, they too have been crying for decades and centuries to be free of all of this injustice. And this is the only peace that we should be practicing. And that I indeed every day try to practice in between the odd expletive. So if we are working on ways forward, it is this deep and brutal honesty that I ask you to do, that I ask of myself every single day. A little note on technologies. I am gobsmacked by how many clever people there are. Lefty, clever people. Amy Goodman sort of younger, clever people. And I'm gobsmacked by the fact that the two icebergs are trying to sink our ethical justice and compassionate Titanic. I'm referring to Zuckerberg and Sandberg. Those icebergs are standing in the way of our justice and ethical compassion with the monetizing of WhatsApp. You know, with things they're trying to do, decrypt it, make it less secure. They're directly putting the lives of real human beings, you and me and maybe even Stellan, at risk. No, it's not funny. Those rural activists in the Philippines that are getting mowed down ad nauseum, the queer folk across Africa who are trying to find a place of safety so they can just love another person irrespective. Those are the people that rely on technologies that are safe. And if we don't have technologies that are safe, because Zuckerberg didn't turn out as sweet as we'd hoped, and we know what Google is, so that Signal that everybody is jumping ship onto, away from WhatsApp into this new Signal, my entire government and cabinet, you can nicely hack into them. They're all on Signal now. They've abandoned WhatsApp. But all of that is flawed. We need to develop technologies that are safe and that serve us. All the clever techies must come and do that as I write poems. They must be developing technologies that are safe and that can be used, and that not only advance our cause, but protect the lives and the integrity and the lifestyles of the people most at risk, like my rural Filipino and Filipino friends, like the queers across Africa. And then lastly, and then I'm going to conclude, if I'm still on time, with a poem. Oh, 5 minutes, like half an eternity. Revolutions were born in fewer minutes than 5. The other thing that's been vexing me, as I might, some of you were here at the first opening plenary and the other night, I can't remember, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I think today is Sunday, hallelujah. So the other thing is like non-violence, like Gandhi's marches for salt, and now people are saying if you have high blood pressure and you're older, you can't have any more salt, so I don't really know about that either, but anyway. So Gandhi's, if you remember Gandhi's non-violent salt marches, or the marches for justice in India, led by Gandhi and others at the time, and you'll remember, if you saw the movie Gandhi, the masses and masses of people that kind of struggle requires. So India is very convenient with all of its billion people. It can martyr a great many people. Many people can die for justice in a non-violent way, confronting an extremely violent oppressor and transforming the oppressor through your ritualized sacrifice. Hundreds of thousands beaten down, replaced by yet more hundreds of thousands. If you don't have a critical mass, it's futile. Look at that awesome girl, Rachel Corrie. Do we have a Rachel Corrie movement? Do we remember Rachel Corrie every day on either her birthday and or the day she died? How few do. I'm all the way at the southern tip of Africa, and I remember Rachel Corrie. She reminds me of many of us when we were little and what we did against apartheid, standing before those bulldozers. So as we do and think about improving our nonviolent strategies, where we don't have critical mass, we need to door-to-door. We need to go build that critical mass if you want to do nonviolence. And or I'm moving more towards re-looking at the need for, when I was little in the 1980s in South Africa, we had self-defense units, self-defense collectives, which ensured your physical safety at times and or were networks of survival, which many activists in your countries also still have. Is it right? Self-defense units. So some of them are, don't necessarily practice nonviolence. There are communities in South Africa founded on the same principles of self-defense in the townships in Cape Town, for example, and indeed in Johannesburg as well. But they are of women and queer women, black women, poor women, and they are to defend their bodies against the extreme violences perpetrated against us every day by the men of our communities, the men we love, men whose psyches are so brutalized from centuries of depredations committed against them that the only way they can breathe is to commit similar depredations against us, our bodies, every single day. So these are the self-defense units, and I think that in the first opening plenary in that evening spoke to me about a recognition that not even non-violence should be an imperial force, and that we shouldn't impose non-violence upon other people, even as we're cognizant of the fact that violence breeds yet more violence, breeds yet more violence ad nauseum. And so I would like to conclude with a very brief poem, really very brief, I promise, for Matt Meyer in particular, because he requested it so sweetly. And thank you for giving me your space. It's called Fragile or Fragile. In your eyes that shift with the anxieties of these times, I see the deepest compassion imaginable for the perpetrators in all we are, the survivor victims we forced to be. In your wide open gaze, I see reflected my very own soul. And for your single act of kindness, I offer you my fragile heart.
That are on sale for you, or steal them if you can. 2 books that is labor of life for the last 10 years, and the work of wonderful people across the world, but also Matt, who happens to be here somewhere. There you are. These books, The Movements of Movements, taught me a great deal about things I'd been reflecting on, but also the struggles that are going on, that are breaking out across the world, of indigenous peoples, of Dalits in India, of women, of people of all kinds of sexualities, of people of other colors. And it's taught me really who I am, that I am an upper caste, upper class male who has had tremendous privilege in life. I was blind to this in much of my work as an activist, as a researcher. I never realized both the enormous doors of privilege it opened to me, nor the doors that it closed to me. And I think this blindness is something that even working on these books has helped open me begin to overcome. And I want to put that before you. And in what I say, I think will be reflected my past, though I'm struggling to overcome it. So let me move to my points, and I will try and be respectful for time, but please, of course, tell me when my time's over. I'm from India, but I'm not going to talk about India here. I'm going to talk more from what I've learned of my work in the last 15, 20 years, and try and raise in this session on looking ahead at certain issues. I want to flag certain issues, which in the time I was here and in the agenda I find are less reflected. One is the huge contradictions of what we call civil society, and to which most of us would probably say we belong. And the challenges that these contradictions pose for peace, justice, and transformation. They are huge, they are swallowing us, and I want to spend a few minutes on that. And the need for us not just to accept it, but to challenge this and to break free, I argue, in my essay in the second book. The second issue is the question of climate change and the new forms of violence that it is opening up. Not that it will open up, that it is already opening up in many parts of the world. And how this is intersecting with the emergence of populist nationalism, xenophobia, and forms of violence which I think we have never seen in history before, and will, because of the non-linear nature of climate change, are going to face futures which we have never looked at before. So I think we who are involved in struggle and resistance, and those who are involved in studying struggle and resistance, need to be looking at this future. The third question is, what is movement anyway? And so I'm going to start, in a sense, with that. I think, I'm not sure if we always recognize this, but we're living, I believe, in one of the great ages of movement, and it's only opening up. By movement, I'm not just talking about traditional concepts of movement, and I'll come back to this, of masses of people moving, expressing their will in one form or another, which is extremely important, but also, more importantly, in a sense, the swell, the rise that is taking place of historically suppressed people across the world. This is building on struggles of the past, but it is taking place here and now. Of Dalits, of African Americans here in this country, of blacks in many parts of the world, but also, and peoples of color, but also of many other sections of society, of indigenous peoples included. The secondly is the huge blowback from colonialism and neoliberalism that is taking place in the rise of xenophobia and nationalisms across the world. This is true as movement. It is expressing itself. And it's not only in that form, but it's expressing itself in the form of people fleeing those contexts. The war in Rwanda, the war in so many parts of the world, has been caused not by internal strife only, or internal differences, but also by the pressure of the world economy and the exploitation of people everywhere in the world. And people are fleeing in greater numbers today than has been ever known before. And we're seeing the reshaping of Europe itself and the crisis it is going through, and it now resorting to the same kind of the continent which attempt to internationalize itself, overcome borders, is now succumbing to precisely that. We're sliding back. So I think that it's extremely important to look at this history it's emerging here, and then the growing impacts of climate change as on the growing reactions also, as we're seeing in the United States, to popular nationalism. It's re-energizing progressive movement. So all of this is taking place in our times, and I want to remind ourselves, we look back to 1968, some look back to 1917, some look back to 2011, as great points. There were great points, but I believe we're at the beginning of a rise of a new wave, and we're standing there today. So in this context, civil society, quickly. I've tried writing on this in this book, spelling out my understandings, but I want to put it forward here. The first issue I want to raise is that civil society stands in the way of much of this. And I echo here what Bernadette said. I think it's extremely important to understand that we stand on the foundations that genocide have provided us, that barbarism, and that civil society, for all that it has done, that it is doing, and for which it is so much celebrated in terms of its contributions to so many transformations that have been positive and democratizing, civil society has also been at the leading edge of colonialism in history, of barbarism, and of genocide, and continues to be at the leading edge of oppression, such as in India against Dalits. It is civil society that does that, in whatever name it comes to. In Bengal, we call it Bhadralok, the proper folk, the gentle folk, the chosen ones. But we have this across the world, and I think we need to look at ourselves as coming from that world, and the contradictions we contain within ourselves. I secondly put forward to you that it's not just something that is the term civil society has been purposely coined by people from civil society. i.e. us. We are the authors and the, if you like, almost the monopolists of social knowledge. We use the term civil as a mask to hide the vulgarity, the barbarism that is behind it. And we need to strip that mask of civil society and understand what it has stood for in history and stands for today. It is, in fact, I argue in my essay, a single point through which almost all that we are fighting against, whether it's colonialism, casteism, classism, patriarchy, all forms of discrimination intersect through civil society. And every one of these has been theorized and has been given position. How many? Okay. Has been given, given location and position and made respectable. So even civil disobedience is in fact incivil disobedience. It is not civil, but it's called that to make us feel that it belongs to civil society. And I think that we need to radically, I won't because of time go on, but I acknowledge the historic contributions of those who struggle for civil liberties, civil rights, and I stand here because of that and for all the work that all of you are doing. But I believe that it is very, very not only fragile ground, but also dangerous ground built on skeletons. The third issue is climate change. Climate change, I've already pointed out, because of its nonlinear nature, it's happening firstly today. I think you know because of tornadoes, storms, hurricanes, etc., forest fires, but it's happening all over the world. And there are refugees all over the world. And there's conflict breaking out all over the world, because as people flee from areas of storm, and the storms are rising and intersecting, they are fleeing into areas, particularly in countries such as Bangladesh, the Philippines, India, into areas which are already densely populated. And conflicts are breaking out over struggles over resources, over land, over water. And we are, the only main body that has really studied this, I think, so far, is the Pentagon. Because it has looked at what are the likely outcomes for world order. After all, it considers itself to be the master of world order, and where the interventions will be required in order to suppress what is happening. So I think we need to look at the fact that it is breaking out, and we need to understand that climate change is not happening just out there. It's in our lives and in everything that we do, but that will open up new theaters of violence, new ways and forms, and where existing social and political organizations are likely to collapse under the weight of these nonlinear forces. The last thing I want to point out is movement. Movement is, I think, that is a grossly understudied, ununderstood subject. It's understood largely as I said earlier, characterized as these swells that are taking place that express themselves in physical ways. I argue that it isn't. Firstly, we need to recognize, in the same ways we need to recognize that we are a part of Mother Earth, that movements too, just like the waves in the ocean, are a part of Mother Earth. It's part of the life of the web of life. It's a part of an expression of the agony and the ecstasy of existence. And we need to understand that it's biological, not determinate. It is open-ended. We need to rethink biology and understand from across disciplines and develop a more interdisciplinary, a more organic and intersectional understanding of movement. I think that will enormously enrich what we do and the way we perceive the world, the way we root ourselves, because most of us are anthropocentric in everything that we do. And because of our belief in science, we cut ourselves off from faith, from the cosmos, from all understandings of natural life. We need to come back into this. And I think that it's a lost part of our life, an absent part of our life that we need to rediscover and bring back in, and it will give us a... Equally, I want to talk about, just briefly mention communication. Today, there's so much focus on social media and communication. Do we look at the importance of pheromonic communication? That is we are exchanging, as we sit in this room, histories of lives, of whole civilizations in chemical ways. Nothing to do with technology, nothing to do with the microphone. We understand through that way. A man called Rupert Sheldrake has explored the subject of morphic resonance. He looks at birds and other forms. But why not look at human beings in terms of how we respond to what we understand is happening elsewhere in organic forms and allow ourselves to be part of life? So there are many, many clues, and there are more I could have said, but I would like you to think about these questions as we look ahead, as we build revolution, as we build violence and non-violence, and struggle with the dialectic of the two. Thank you.
I want to acknowledge those sisters and brothers we are related to all over the world that survive, suffer, and struggle under poverty, war, oppression, exploitation, imprisonment, colonialism, and particularly those sisters and brothers we are connected to that went before us in history and whose struggle made our presence today possible. So I would like to begin with 1 minute of silence. Thank you. I'm a white, middle-class, cis male with a privileged background that is identifying as someone that is constantly trying to be a traitor. But I'm failing, and I'm trying again. My international perspective is that I'm a Viking from North Europe, working in the US, aspiring to become an Indian, traveling as a vagabond around the world. And from that perspective, I want to give you some reflections on revolutionary nonviolence. I think we have a trouble with that we are using nonviolence as a very simplified binary of black and white. I think we have a problem that we are using revolution as a form of regime change of states and the creation of formal liberal rights. Both these are problematic, and I'll try to give you a reason why and also what I would see as a way out. My view is that academia is a trend-sensitive concept factory, deeply affected by world events and what media focus on. 25 years ago, when I started my graduate studies, my interest in Gandhi and resistance could be seen as archaeology. Also within peace studies, where I did my PhD, and most of my colleagues, they viewed my interest as an academic suicide. But then came Seattle, the global justice movement, the Arab uprising, and Trump. Now everyone speaks of the resistance. Now people are talking about nonviolent revolutions, and it's even endorsed by conservative thinkers and pundits, at least if these nonviolent revolutions happens against non-Western regimes hostile to US dominance. The same happened with other trendy concepts, gender feminism, social movements, intersectionality, decoloniality, etc., in this trend factory of academia. Well, when that happens, we need to return to the meaning of concepts and radicalize them or develop new ones. The idea of a successful non-violent revolution has spread in world politics among movements and in academia. At the same time as mainstream peace studies has abandoned its roots in revolutionary nonviolence long time ago and developed into critical security studies and critique of militarism, promoting an apolitical or liberal mediation and conflict resolution. At least that's my experience in Scandinavia, in Europe, of how peace studies has evolved. The success of nonviolent revolution that people suggest is suggested even while we have a social economic injustice that prevail among the poor and the majorities in post-revolutionary societies, as in South Africa or India, the Philippines, Tunis, Egypt, Georgia, or wherever place you want to look at. I think we need to rethink nonviolence and revolution, not only from an international perspective, but more importantly from below, from the perspective of the most subordinated in society. We need to decolonize nonviolence and revolution from the liberal hegemony we live in. We need to decenter nonviolence and revolution from the one-dimensional focus of the state. Basically, I and Sean Chabot in our collaboration are arguing that there is no thing such as a successful nonviolent revolution. However, revolutionary nonviolence exists. Nonviolent revolution as the national, sudden political regime change will always fail until it's total and global. Because the national, sudden political regime change in a place like, for example, South Africa is still embedded in world capitalism and the colonial violent system that we live in. The nonviolent revolution, or whatever we want to call it, in South Africa was a success and a failure. Just to give you as one example, because if we look at South Africa in 1994, it was a major success, of course, that we, through the struggle, it was made possible with universal suffrage, some form of rule of law, some form of freedom of expression, and equality in the face of the law, of course. That was a major change from the white minority racist regime of apartheid, clearly. But South Africa today is actually more economically unequal than it was in 1994, despite the majority rule of the ANC since then. If our measurement is from the subaltern, from the poor and the repressed in South Africa, there hasn't been a nonviolent revolution there yet. Revolutionary nonviolence as the self-empowerment by subordinated communities in building increasing autonomy and self-rule, as, for example, the Abalali slum dwellers in Durban, South Africa are doing, or the indigenous communities of the Zapatistas and the indigenous in Standing Rock. Yes, revolutionary nonviolence does exist. It's going on all the time as we speak. So, I'm suggesting that as revolutionaries we need to learn to fail better by attempting for revolution while building autonomous relations, institutions, resources, and go from regime change of states to self-rule by communities as the idea of what is a revolution. As nonviolent activists, we need to recognize how we are always related to violent systems and exploitations, although we fight against them and try to envision a society that goes beyond it. So we need to go from the binary of the pure nonviolent against evil violence to instead having an understanding of nonviolence as always being within the relationship to violence, always being against it, and always trying to go beyond it. And we will fail, but we have to try. Thank you.
So thanks to all of our incredible speakers for their words and their poetry and their moments of silence and their very, very profound wisdom on all of these different concepts that they brought to us. We have a good deal of time, I believe, for questions because we do have a gap between this session and the next, so we can move forward with questions. Yes. Would you like a microphone?
Microphone? Yes.
We have a lot.
Wedge this, give her the mic.
Ah, yeah.
Is there a moving microphone?
Well done,
There you go.
Okay.
Modo, Galelega Chichalegi. Thank you. I am very grateful. I am descendant of the Cherokee peoples and a member of the Cherokee Southwest Township. And my heart is full and very grateful to this panel for acknowledging that we stand here to now on this place doing the work that we do based on the genocide of our peoples. And I have both a point I'd love to make, but also a question. And my point is that for those of us indigenous peoples in Turtle Island and around the world, the genocide is not over. Yes, it's the foundation of this country, but it continues. And I think in this organization, we need to look at the missing and murdered Native women, indigenous women in Turtle Island, what we call North America, those rates, and the dealing with those or the turning of the blind eye to those is an appalling atrocity and injustice. And our elders also have cautioned me to speak. When we speak of genocide, I was going once to speak at a genocide conference in California, and I asked J.T. Garrett, who is one of our elders and medicine teachers, of what should I speak, and he said, you speak of the suicide of our young people. That is our ongoing genocide, and it has to stop. And my question for the panelists, but also for everyone in the room and for this organization is, how do we have this brutal honesty about this ongoing violence and about the ways that we benefit from what we inherit based on that?
Want us to respond? Oh, I'd like to dive in. May? I have to get intimate with the microphone. I'm trying to not get intimate, but you know, it's hard. Like a hard rain's gonna fall. Now, Stellan, I know from the International Peace Research Association, and I have great affection for him. I would even use the word love a little bit loosely, too. Some of you I am very fond of and love indeed. So, and the new ones I will get to know and love, too. So there, lots of love. There's no shortage of love. Like many things in the world, there isn't a shortage. Intersectionality and the decolonialism movements require, and the young people in my country in particular, are extremely vocal and very inspiring and very beautiful, courageous, and at times very stupid too. I'm brutally honest. So it would have, like, you know, you should have stopped before you began to deconstruct South Africa. Look at the Viking ancestry, and here's how practically we can work with one another. More powerful are the movements in Viking lands, the Scandinavian countries, where those backlashes of neo-Nazis and the fascism therein, which is built on real Nazism and real fascisms of the past. So therein, you know what I mean? So this is the lessons we need to constantly learn. And now again sits a brown former apartheid survivor woman on a panel reminding a beautiful, very beloved brother of the way to go. So next time, it shouldn't be necessary anymore. And this is how we learn, and we don't replicate the past repeatedly. And such a privilege to meet you. Did that work? You don't feel unloved, eh?
Oh, no. No, it might come to a surprise for many people of the rise of the neo-Nazis in Sweden. It's a tremendous problem. Actually, among the men, the majority are voting or supporting the neo-Nazis. So Sweden is really changing, and that's important for the U.S. progressive left to realize that Sweden is not anymore the 1970s. And that struggle is not really happening. It's very little of a resistance going on in that country. So that's tremendously dangerous.
Thank you.
I think that you raised a good point about how sometimes when we think about violence, we think like something happened in a country. The genocide happened in Rwanda. The genocide happened in many different places around the world. And when we no longer see people fighting, we no longer see houses being going down with, say, no, there's no more violence in that place, because sometimes we are blind and we think that violence, we think about violence as a direct violence only, and that's where we think we are done with the battle toward bringing peace, while it's the time to keep fighting even more, because Polly raised a very good point about how some people, indigenous people, are still, the new generation, are committing suicide. And it reminds me of the women in Rwanda that I told you about, that I work with in the program, who are giving up on taking medications, because 24 years on medication, and for them taking medication, it's around what they have gone through. It's always a reminder of what they have gone through, and they're giving up. They just say like, I'm not gonna see a doctor anymore. That's really like suicide in another form, because they're gonna die if they don't take medication. So the genocide is over, but how about what they are still going through? How can we call that? So we need to be more open-minded and enlarge our definition of violence. I think that way we'll be going toward the right direction in bringing peace.
I'd like to add to what you just said, Liliane. And we haven't met Polly Walker, but I thank you for raising the points that you did, and it's fundamental, I think, to everything that I believe now. It's a plug, if you like, for the books, but I have tried at some length in trying to answer the question in the essay that I've written called Break Free. I think the first task is to not so much to interrogate ourselves, is to understand, locate ourselves in society, and to rethink and challenge the way we've been taught and are domesticated and tamed to understand ourselves and to structure society. And as I said, by skillful uses of words such as civil, which are seen to be automatically good. By definition, it's good. And I think, for me, that has been a huge lesson. I started this back in fact, consciously in 2007, but I've noticed there were threads of this happening in the 90s, asking myself questions about and how I used the term, how I understood it, what I was doing. But I think that is an essential part of doing this. The second is to recognize the, if you like, the intersectionality of violence and how it flows through us as individuals, and we reproduce it in everything that we do. We reproduce it as one of the quotes I've given, how parents of immigrants tell their daughters to shave their body hair because they have to become more presentable. It's at that minute level of existence, of behavior, and of internalization of violence that it takes to much larger ones and in a way much deeper ones. Obviously, I cite this precisely because of its apparent triviality. But the point being that I think it reproduces itself in everything that we do. And so that personal reflection is a second task of going through, of disappearing within yourself and trying to understand how you have behaved, how we behave, and how to, and thirdly, to recognize, I think, those that are outside us, and how are we differentiated? I don't think the classification of caste and class, etc., are sufficient. It's not sufficiently organic. It's not holistic. Now, I'm not suggesting that I found the answer, but it was an attempt at that. I put forward the category of the incivil as a dialectically related concept and challenge to civility. And I go through and I try and draw from history major initiatives that have been taken by people at the heart of civil society to turn the table, to turn meaning, to challenge and turn around the world. And I think that I'm not suggesting that these are the only stories, but I think that we need to find stories which help us learn how the world can be changed. Fourthly, there's the issue of how are the incivil doing this? What are the strategies they are using to turn the world? What can we learn from them? And I'm talking here, obviously, for somebody who comes from the heart of civil society, in every sense. Because we need to respect that and recognize that it is precisely our location which determines how we behave. Now, all of this, I think we need to break free of. We need to break free of this grip that this concept has on us. And I think only then will we begin to realize our full creative powers. Because we are, all of us, constrained, domesticated, tamed, and trained to behave in certain ways, and including very much by the institutions we create, which then only wrap us in further norms and strictures to behave, including academic recognition, the rat race, and everything else that goes with it. So it's all part of that structure. And at least I found tremendous meaning once this began to open up for me. And I offer it to you as something that at least I'd be happy to have your comments. All the email addresses of all the contributors are given at the end. And so please feel free. I'd like to take 1 minute, please excuse me, to mention that Matt is one of the people of the contributors, but also other non-contributors have actually taken this idea of movements and made it their own, which is wonderful. It's for me, obviously. And one of the outcomes of that is that a comrade in Boston is at Encuentro Cinco, some of you may know him, Suren Mudliar, has set up a website which it's still not up and running, at movements of movements. And please note the plurality in movements, okay? It's not movement. The movements of movements.net. And it is a project to try and open up this discussion in an open-ended way, using the material in the books, but where we invite everybody, if you'd like to take part, to please contact us and to take part on the website, which we hope will be a live, interactive website. Thank you.
Anyone else responding?
Yep.
Sure. One and then two.
Oh,
Too soft for those hard dudes.
Thank you. This is an outstanding. I'm Elavi Ndura from Gallaudet University. I'm grateful to Liliane for sharing her pain and loss with us, while at the same time calling us to build bridges. By the way, Liliane, I am a Hutu woman from Burundi who, like your mother, was forced to raise my children alone. So I understand. I'm connecting with you. Somehow you and my children will hopefully meet somewhere because we share exactly the same pain and the same loss. I'm grateful to Jai for, with all the work you have done, acknowledging that you still had blindness to privilege. This humility is very inspiring. To Bernadette for humbly offering your fragile heart in your poem, and to Stellan for granting us this moment of silence to actually remind us of what is at stake. So, this panel is rightfully so entitled, Looking Forward. So what are the 2 or 3 practical, you have experienced this PJSA conference for several days. Most of you have been here from the beginning, and now we're getting ready to depart, and maybe by the time we get home, we'll have forgotten what you're trying to teach us. But what are 2 or 3 practical words of wisdom in terms of how we, PJSA, as an organization, and each one of us in this room as individual, can practically remember what you are teaching us on this beautiful Sunday, in terms of changing and seeing and acknowledging and actually doing the work that we need to do as you are teaching us. So 2 or 3 words of wisdom. Thank you.
What responses? What's the best?
Is it always me? Hey, you 3, you go first, I'll go second. Are you ready? Yes. Go then, I'll go after you.
Okay.
Please.
That's a good question, right? And yes, we need action. We need action. We have been talking for so long, and I always say that something like the genocide to happen, it should be shame on the world, on everyone. Because genocide is never a surprise. Never. There's always signs that it's about to happen. But action comes for the aftermath. If meetings that are held after the genocide about what to do with the aftermath were held before the genocide happens, we would be here sharing a different story. It is so sad to see someone like my generation, at my age, sitting here and sharing story of pain. Sometimes when I share my story, or when people, my generation, people from my country, when young people, when they share their stories, sometimes you think they are like 100 years old, because how can such a young person like carry such a heavy story? And that's where we need to start from. Do we really want our children and our grandchildren to live in this world of holding meetings like this where they talk about violence, and violence? We need to hear beautiful stories that everybody will say, congratulations, yes, you made it, beautiful, not crying. So to be very direct to the question that you asked about, like what are the practical ways that we can make this possible, like we can make the revolution and action possible. It's everybody's business. I think I said it when I was studying. I said that studying by the world is so huge. That's why I said I'm not trying my best to make the world a better place. I'm trying my best to make the people around me, make the people around you, make their world a better place. That's a huge step. From there, we're going to win this battle. Thank you.
I believe you. Now I can retire with that cocktail and poetry book I've been yearning to do. 11 Dura, you are very wicked. Those are very tough things. So I had skipped my reflections earlier, a couple of brief ones. The one is this Kumbaya civil rights hymn moment, and ironically to a lord rather than a lady or indeed a person. And in South Africa, we had a very mournful song called Senzerina, which means, in essence, what have we done? And you go, what have you done? What have you done? As in, it all is very mournful, and it speaks from a position of victimhood, a sort of passivity, a sort of that. There's also, forgive me, and with respect, Stellan, I'm doing one of those things. The Holocaust and that Kristallnacht always vexed me as a child as I was trying to grapple with apartheid and how it came to be. I tried to, people threw me into the Holocaust. Like, it seemed to me as an outsider, not in the middle of Kristallnacht. So I'm trying to suggest now, please forgive me, and I think Rachel Corrie is talking to me, but we need more Rachel Corries. We need more people willing to say and sacrifice. Some 15 years ago, European feminists who were about to retire, on the cusp of retirement, were saying they built the feminism of Europe that was exported to the rest of us, and now they are more concerned because they're getting at retirement age. They're worried about their pension and living dignified lives in their middle class, dotage. And these were now their concerns. And so some of them, more brutally honest than others, acknowledged that they had and are selling out, even as many of them had done a great many sacrifices. So again, back to that brutal honesty. We can't have a revolution while we're shopping at Neiman Marcus or Target, for that matter. That's not going to work. And in my country, it's tragic for me, and I want to go not Gumbaya, but Senzeninas, and what have we done? When I look at my people, the ones who don't have, the ones who are consuming as if there's no tomorrow, and the others who are aspiring to that same consumption as they feed and gorge off these horrendous soap operas, which, make them want to aspire to be consumptive. And I think Rachel Corrie is visiting me continuously and asking me to be and continue to be as courageous as we need and as my young sister is, and to continue to put our bodies on the line as the people have done throughout time. And this is the only way we will ever have justice, is by putting everything on the line. There is no comfort in revolution, and I want to claim my rage and my just rage. And I want to speak with Jay about this incivility, and we must be uncivil. All this damned politeness is moot, and we need to start living more authentically, brutal honesty.
To be uncivil.
Two things. I think that we We need to recognize the importance of resistance in order to make any kind of change. And I mean resistance in the way where we are prepared to risk everything. The forces we're up against is demanding a resistance. And the second thing is that we need to radicalize our understanding of resistance. So firstly, the need of resistance. Let me take my country this time. So there has been a lot of resistance going on in Sweden historically that made the exceptional welfare state and democracy possible in Sweden. That created also an international solidarity from even the regime towards the ANC during the anti-apartheid struggle. However, people forgot the importance of resistance in Sweden. From the time when we got the welfare democracy, people retreated and didn't use resistance anymore, believed in the system, believed in the state, and relaxed into that the state would organize society. So then we got neoliberalism first, and that was dismantling the welfare state. Then we got neo-fascism, and that's where we are today, and we don't have the resistance yet. That's been forgotten. So the country that went from having the highest frequency of strikes in Europe 100 years ago, that made it possible to create the kind of level of welfare and democracy that we got, is now having the lowest frequency of strikes, despite all the rising class differences and the rise of the fascism. So don't forget the importance of resistance. And with that, I don't mean call your congressperson. Right? Resistance is about dismantling the system, and it's going to take risks. The second thing is to radicalize our understanding of resistance, and that's what I meant, that when everyone is talking about resistance, or it's in the mainstream, we need to go back to what do we mean with revolution and nonviolence. We need to radicalize our understanding of it, and that's the time to do that now. For us.
Jay, did you say something? Are you going to save it for just now?
No.
Are you ready?
I thought there may be other questions.
Oh, yeah. Let
them
the
come.
poet.
There are lots of questions. Please.
Should we take a few questions? That would be so nice. Thank you.
So my name is Tina Thomas. I am a assistant professor of anthropology at Juniata College, where actually Liliane attends. And I just want to express my gratitude for this panel. I want to express my gratitude for the centering of marginalized voices, despite whatever privilege that might be had on this panel. I was having a conversation actually with folks like Muthien and Aisha, who is not here today, yesterday, about how peace and conflict studies should be centered around these marginalized voices. And I think you made that point very clear when you spoke about just this idea of the history, right? And I think, Matsi, you made that very clear yesterday as well on a panel that we had about how inherently violent structurally the development of this discipline has been. So I want to thank you. I also want to critique that this should have been done earlier in terms of this conference. So I just wanted to create a space for that intervention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I really appreciate everything that was said, and I also appreciate that there is a little bit of an effort to decenter the U.S. when we have conversations around peace and justice, given how often the violence that, happens in the U.S. is, I know it's present for a lot of people elsewhere too, because we learn from the resistance in the U.S. Unfortunately, I find the knowledge about resistance elsewhere doesn't travel with the same ease up to North America as North American knowledge travels into the rest of the world. I want to say something around, I really appreciated this idea of taking away the civil from civil society, and add something to what Stellan was saying, that there is no resistance in Europe. And I think there is. I think it has always been resistance in Europe, but it wasn't palatable to European civil society because it came from people who were saying it, who were too angry, who didn't look like they belonged to Europe. And we constantly have to make our anger not rude or insulting, because if it's not said in the nicest, kindest way, it cannot be heard. And I heard on NPR this morning how Dr. Ford, is that her name? You know, she wasn't angry, and it was an interview with Kimberly Crenshaw, and she said, you know, how is it that women come forward to tell their testimony, they remain so calm? Well, because we can't be angry, because if we are angry, our testimony doesn't count. And if you're an immigrant in Europe and you're angry, your testimony doesn't count. So I think there has been a resistance in Europe, but it has been diminished by the white left in Europe because it was not palatable, because it was not framed in this Marxist framework that we work with, where class has to top everything and we have to all give up everything else in order to fit in the class struggle. Or it doesn't fit into the feminist framework, because if our women want to wear hijab, then that's not a feminist cause. So also choose where we put our, like, whose bodies do you get behind? I think that is also really important, and I like that we talk about Rachel Corrie, because I was in Palestine the year after Rachel Corrie had passed. And that's a reference point to me, but it's not a reference point for a lot of other people. So I think there is resistance, but is it palatable to us? And yeah, let's have a conversation of who do we talk about when we say this is a civil way of discussing, and this is a civil way of saying that you're angry, and this is a civil way of calling somebody out. There is no civil way, because, you know, people have been angry for 500 years. So, you know, to hell with civility.
We'll let our panelists address these last couple of questions, and then I think we'll need to break after
Man
that.
with a tall hand, his hand has been up for ages at the back there.
George Lakey.
To be fair.
George Lakey.
Sorry for interrupting you.
Thanks.
I also want to appreciate very much the panel, and also to pass along concern that I've heard from several African Americans about the use of the phrase kumbaya, which I've heard informally in corridors around and about, as well as from a panel member, and the concern that they ask me to convey whenever I'm in a gathering where that becomes a part of the discourse, that that's actually quite hurtful to many African Americans, because kumbaya represents for them a profound spiritual leading, or a kind of spiritual direction that has very often been supportive to nonviolent resistance, very often supportive to revolution. And because it's used in a way that's slightly condescending or demeaning, a mere kumbaya moment, it's a way of actually demeaning the experience of African Americans who have struggled so long and so hard in our country. So it's simply a request. I'm just conveying for them a request that we just leave that out of our vocabulary in the future. And if we want to, and of course if we want to demean something, it's fine to demean it, but use some other phrase, please. Thank you.
Do we respond now? Great. I want to profoundly and humbly and respectfully apologize. Even in my just rage, I must always be one, compassionate, and be willing to acknowledge where I have been harmful to others. At times, though, I have been harmed, and that harm has forced me to transform in that moment and or over time. Violence enacted upon me, all forms of violence, not just physical violence, which then forced me to transform over time. And so even as I pay respect and with great humility acknowledge the suffering and the sacrifice of a great many very beautiful people, I also want to remember another beautiful black woman, Audre Lorde, and her famous quote about the master's tools cannot be effectively used to dismantle the master's house. In South Africa, our institutions after apartheid re-echo the violence pervasive in the society. So in our national legislature, in my birth mother city of Cape Town, the national parliament is so violent where they perpetrate labor practices that are horrific. And one man in protest, I think you'll relate to this, smuggled his firearm into Parliament and would have shot the supervisor. He's a senior manager, the head of the International Relations Division, a very important, very well-paid job. And he instead couldn't find the man, and so, thank God he didn't shoot anybody else, shot himself. But his depression and his rage against the violence perpetrated against him, he's a black man with a struggle history. He had been documenting his rage for the longest time and speaking to all and sundry, trying to have his needs addressed. He, while like a great many black South Africans, is a profound and deep Christian. And one of the quotes that went viral, describing this man's state of victimhood and the suffering he felt, is one of these biblical quotes, and forgive me, I'm not good with the Bible. It ends with, nothing clean can come from something unclean. So the man was born from a woman, the woman is unclean, the man is clean. And the ways in which colonialism was deeply shackled to Christianity in our native lands, and the ways in which it remains and shackles our people and brutalizes our women in its language and its practices. That just recently the shooting happened in the last week, and it brutalizes me, it brutalizes all women, and women from which I am born is sacred, and I am sacred. And so I cannot say that I would agree with the Abrahamic and any other religion that debases women and the sacredness and power of women from which we are all born, because none of us come from a test tube. And this is the point about Christianity and the vexing challenge I have, and the right-wing backlash within these religions, whether it be Islam or Christianity, in all of our countries on this continent and in Africa, which is misogynist or woman-hating, deeply homophobic, and deeply enslaving, and promoting a particular kind of neo-imperialist agenda which does not liberate us. It is very different to moments of liberation in theology that existed in the past. It is now deep struggles we have against this very same Christianity and other Abrahamic and other religions that are enslaving my people, and that I feel compelled to speak brutally against and demand justice for that. Another quick flag is that Europe and other places, with respect, because a quarter of my ancestry comes from Europe, Dutch. They, like Rachel Corrie and a great many others, laid their bodies on the line. We should not forget the partisans during World War II, to name but one moment. All those volunteers from all over the world who went and fought in the Spanish Civil War. Yes, it was a violent war, but there were many non-violent activists as well. The communists, the peasants, the strong women, and the queers who laid their bodies on the line. I ask you again, with respect, are you willing to lay your body on the line and make your sacrifices? Because sacrifices are what are needed, especially on this continent, where people think we're going to get liberation by singing, what's that one from Bob Dylan? Hard rain's going to fall? Sorry.
I want to first of all thank the entire panel for being here with us, both individually and collectively. Your topics have been quite fascinating to me. I am quite interested, well, what drew my attention to you all was your comments about Rwanda. I have a deaf friend from Rwanda who has gone through similar experiences since he was a child. Actually, no, two folks, one male, one female, but from different classes, shall we say, or different regimes. Relief support for the government for deaf people, not so much. So they flee the camps in the Congo looking for other deaf people that are survivors. And unfortunately, if you are deaf or have a disability, you are left at your own devices in many of these countries. So I do admire the peace work that you're doing, but at the same time, I'm thinking about how do we build some type of infrastructure that can be maintained, some type of collaborations with individuals who are deaf, because I have not heard any comments this weekend about people who have disabilities. And I think that we need to be allies to everyone, not only those who are able-bodied, but to individuals who have some level of disability also.
Thank you. I believe we're just about out of time, so I'm going to give each of the panelists, we have several questions and comments that are still circulating around. I'll give each panelist a chance to respond to whatever they feel still needs to be responded to and said, and then we'll break to move on to our next session. 1 minute each.
Or do you want to start just go like this? Cool.
Yeah. I didn't understand well the question. I'm so sorry. Was it a question? Yeah, I didn't understand well the question or the.
What are we doing about being more inclusive around
around
bodied people?
Okay. Because you mentioned Rwanda.
Questions what can be done
Mhm.
to create more of an inclusive environment for people who have disabilities or who are deaf in the work that we're currently doing in the social justice realm.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. I think one quick response to that is that we all need to step out of our comfort zone. I think that's what we need, and to get to know people who are different from us, and don't think about the world as a world we live in, because the world is so large. And the other thing I was about to say, one thing that I would like to conclude with is that if we think about people like Martin Luther King and the work they have done, and other great people that have contributed so much to make this world and to bring peace into this world, with the so limited ways to channel their voices, I think from there we can learn. We have so many ways we can contribute to bringing peace in this world, with the opportunities we have, with the technology, with easy communication, with being able to hold meetings like this. So we have tools. That's why action is easy. So let's act. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so this is my 1 minute wrap. Wherever you find yourself, create a diverse community that focus on personal transformation and building the future society, and that resists the evil colonial system we are placed in, and link up to others.
Oh, Stellan, that was very beautiful and succinct. Okay, so to try to be quick. South Africa, as flawed as it is, and as challenging as it is, we have some people like myself who remain, not just in the uncivil society, because I'm civil, the society is uncivil or incivil, and in government. We have ministers some who justifiably call themselves activists. The Minister of Tourism, for example, everywhere he goes, he speaks about the need for our people, the black majority, to not be homophobic and to kill, rape and murder lesbians, for example. So these beautiful activists on all levels and in different ways across my country and elsewhere, they do beautiful legislation and policy, and I am so pleased to know that I am part of my work on the Constitution is to ensure that the South African Sign Language becomes an an official language in the actual constitution, where we have 9 recognized official languages and 2 indigenous languages mentioned. So SASL, South African Sign Language, will join there. And so in some ways, as hard as life is and as hard as we struggle every day and we try to live Rachel Corrie's spirit, we do have some successes.
Hi. I'd like to give my minute for us to all take a moment of silence to reflect on what we've learned in these days, to remember and recall our ancestors and our children and the world that we're building.
Join me in thanking these wonderful panelists who shared this deep wisdom with us.
And the great facilitator.
And Amy, do you have instructions for us next?
Bless you.
So we do have it's on. So we do have a nice hot lunch just out the doors, and I'm going to encourage everyone to go through the line in less than 30 seconds so you can come back here and we can start the awards luncheon, of which we have some very distinguished guests and speakers at 1 o'clock.